Matt Jacobs, and I'm the digital coordinator for the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. But more pressing and more tangible to this conversation, I am one of the co-directors of the European Digital Diplomacy Exchange, also known as EDI, which is organizing today's conversation. For those of you who are unfamiliar, EDI is a network founded by the U.S. Department of State and implemented by the Center for European Perspective in Slovenia that seeks to build the digital strategic communications capacities and competencies of partner governments across the region, with the idea that doing so will help us to protect and advance democratic resilience through informational exchange and through communications across Europe and across America. And as part of this, we have organized a number of lectures for government communicators and for those who are engaging in the forefront of digital diplomacy practice area. But we are now seeking to expand our network and seeking to expand our expertise and offerings to those of the general public and those who have not yet been able to join us. And so we've organized this virtual lecture series in order to bring EDI's network activities out to you guys. So as part of that, I am super excited to introduce an old colleague of mine and an individual who is engaged with EDI since the very beginning, my colleague Andreas Sandre, who will be leading today's lecture. So for those of you who do not know Andreas yet, so Andreas is the author of Digital Diplomacy, Conversations on Innovation in Foreign Policy, which is one of the first books that I can remember ever reading about digital diplomacy, and certainly one of the first people to give it the credibility necessary to publish a book. He also authored Twitter for Diplomats. His recent research on TikTok will be featured in the upcoming Oxford Handbook on Digital Diplomacy, which will be published, I believe, next year. So Andreas is the press and public affairs officer, just like me, at the Embassy of Italy in Washington, D.C., living in the city, just like me. He was previously at the Italian mission to the United Nations in New York, and he has contributed articles to a number of press outlets, including the Huffington Post, the Global Policy Journal, and other publications. So he's spoken at numerous international events, first and foremost, one of our EDI events, virtually albeit, but we hope to get him in person this next time. But also some other things that maybe, I don't know, a few of you might have heard of, including, TEDx events and events put on by Mashable. And all of which through he's been able to focus on social media and technology for good, digital diplomacy, digital communication strategies, and technology policy, all things that are integral to good governance and to broader democratic resilience. So he's really interesting on social media. He's one of those who study digital diplomacy, but actually does digital, unlike, I think, a good majority of us. And you can find him on Twitter at Andreas212NYC or on TikTok and Instagram at We Are Digital Diplomacy. Now, if you haven't got that from me yet, I'm sure you're going to get that again from Andreas as he tries to network us all and make sure that we're all synced up and connected and able to continue this conversation further. So without further any ado, I want to hand it off to you, Andreas. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right. Thank you very much for the invitation and for having me talk about TikTok, which it's a platform that I love and sometimes hate, but I think everybody does at this point. So I'm actually going to see if I can just ask a quick question to those people that are connected now and see if, one, anybody use TikTok, whether for a personal use or for work, or if anybody has very strong feelings, whether positive or negative, about TikTok. If anybody want to say just anything, they're more than welcome. Otherwise, we'll just start the presentation. Silence. That's fine. I'm going to start and share my presentation with you so I can... let me know if you see it. All right. Okay, good. The idea of TikTok for diplomacy is not new. It's now more than a couple of years that TikTok has been used for diplomatic and government government news, but I still put in my first screen a question: is TikTok a good tool for diplomacy and for digital diplomacy in general? So what happened like almost over a year ago now, I was asked by Cornelio Biola at Oxford University and Matthias Lufkens, who used to publish the diplomacy study every year, if I wanted to contribute a chapter to what was then the upcoming Oxford Handbook on Digital Diplomacy. And obviously I said yes. And at that point, I was sort of like running experiments on TikTok and whether TikTok was a good tool for diplomacy. And so I sort of started to collaborate with Matthias, who's the co-author of a chapter in the book called New Trends in Digital Diplomacy, The Rise of TikTok and the Geopolitics of Algorithmic Governance. And with Alicia Fiahend to sort of like look at the opportunities, the challenges, the geopolitical issues linked to TikTok. And so the book came about, the chapter came about, and the book is coming out, I think like January, February next year. So very, very soon. And I'm very excited to see what the reaction will be on the chapter of TikTok. I mean, we'll see. But why TikTok? And why did I have at that point a very deep interest in TikTok? So TikTok back then was like growing exponentially. And what it's now, it is a huge, and those are data released by TikTok in March 2023, a huge platform with 150 million Americans on it. That means like half of the US population, 7,000 employees just here in the United States, and 5 million businesses, US businesses that are engaging everybody on TikTok every day. TikTokers are going to spend 40 hours a week each month on the app. Here, the data is here in the United States, which is up like 22% from 2023. So that's the sort of like what this company, the monitoring company Data.ai, is sort of like envisioning for 2024. And over the platform has now 1.677 billion users globally, and 1.1 billion are monthly active users. So it is a huge platform. The numbers are quite incredible. The hashtag, if you search for on TikTok, the hashtag digital diplomacy has now over 100 million views. So there's an interest there as well. And if you go on TikTok, you do see a lot of content that it's related to politics, policy, and foreign policy as well, especially now if you look at content that is related to Israel, to Ukraine, but other conflicts around the world as well. So that's like the why TikTok could possibly be or could possibly become a very important tool for digital diplomacy. So why TikTok continues to grow? So one of the main sort of like things that people look at TikTok is the algorithm, and I call it algorithmic magic. It's an algorithm that is completely different from any other social media platform, and it actually every other social media platform is trying to copy it, starting with Meta with Instagram. And so that algorithm gives content sort of like a different pathways to success than other platform. The other factor to me is what I call the Twitter effect. That is because since Twitter got bought off by Elon Musk, Twitter has sort of like a lot of like users on Twitter, both on like the receiving side and on publishing side, got sort of like fed up with Twitter. And so some are leaving, including a lot of advertisers and a lot of like governments and government agencies as well. And users are leaving as well. And they're trying to find places where they can find either similar content, different content, but oftentimes content related to the news and to the world outside. So I'll give you like a little clip that is Elon Musk on TikTok, and then I'll give you my reaction to that clip.
I don't really use TikTok. I mean, one of the reasons that I emphasize that that our goal here at Twitter is to maximize unregretted user minutes or unregretted user time is that I hear many people tell me they spent a lot of time on TikTok, but they regret the time spent. And that seems like, okay, well, we don't want to have regretted time. We want the time to be unregretted, where you learned things, you were entertained, amused. I mean, frankly, I get more laughs out of Twitter than anything else, and many people tell me the same thing. So that's a good sign.
So, So you talk about regretted time and unregretted time. So I wonder, like, you know, if I ask anybody out there if they regret their time on Twitter, if they regret their time on TikTok, and most of the time, especially if you ask TikTokers, nobody regrets their time on TikTok. The opposite, actually. They actually very happy, and they keep spending hours and hours and hours on the platform. So I think like the dynamics here is changing, and the people that are regretting their time on Twitter or X, let's call it X now, are sort of rising, and the users non-regretting but enjoying their time on TikTok is rising as well. And it's those numbers are rising for TikTok, especially when it comes to the news. And so this is a Pew research from October, end of September, October this year. And you can see that the number of adults like using TikTok for to get the news is increasing, and increasing exponentially, especially when it comes to ages 18-29, so young, but also 30-49, which is my age group. And little by little, and you'll see that as well, ages are not important any longer, but the number of users of any age is sort of like increasing. But what is happening now on other platforms, and that's the same Pew research. You see the first column on Twitter X, the number is going down quite fast. It's going down on Facebook as well. Reddit, which is usually a popular platform for the news, is also going down, although not as fast. But then you see an increase on Instagram from 28 to 34, and TikTok is like almost like a vertical line from 22 to 43%, and that's quite incredible. To me, if I look at other platforms on here, I do see that YouTube, and I'm going to talk about YouTube a little bit later on, is sort of like stabilizing and actually almost growing, because it went down and then up again. And Nextdoor, which is a platform that is not available everywhere, but here in the United States is very well used, and it's actually growing as well. But then you have the Twitch, which is the streamers, also going up, although slightly. So Matt mentioned We Are Digital Diplomacy. So if you go on either Instagram or TikTok, you'll find a channel called We Are Digital Diplomacy, which I launched before I wrote the TikTok chapter for the Oxford Handbook. And the idea there was to look at why TikTok was so popular, so understand the platform, what the trends were at that time, and that was during the pandemic. And to see how other organizations, especially in the international relations sphere and political sphere, how they were using TikTok. And so right after I launched We Are Digital Diplomacy, and I started on TikTok rather than Instagram at that point, because again, the interest was TikTok. I asked social media managers around the world, especially for organizations like the United Nations, UN agencies, international NGOs, what they thought about TikTok, whether they were using it or not. And here I'm going to show you a few of the interviews that I ran, and that was like during the pandemic, the second half of 2020 into 2021. And I asked them, like, what do you think about TikTok? Why is your organization using TikTok? And again, they're all very short videos. They're all like 60 seconds each. All of those then I sort of compacted and published on TikTok as well. Alexandra, I have a couple of questions for you. Why TikTok for the World Health Organization?
So it was a great opportunity for us to collaborate with TikTok to provide their users with health-related information, educational content on health, communicate about health risks with younger audiences than 25 that we are reaching mostly across other social media.
Was actually everybody on board?
Actually, we had a great support. It was a strategic decision. As I said, we were aiming already to reach younger audiences with our health messages. It was a challenge to be regular and to produce video content on regular basis. But when pandemic happened, it was out of question that we need as well to communicate with new audiences.
What's your favorite TikTok account?
I would invite everyone to follow our colleagues in IFRC, UN Migration, or refugees who are sharing a lot of great stories from the ground.
Thank you, Alexandra. So here, what she here what she talks about, and the way that was Alexandra Kuzmanovic. She's based in Geneva at the WHO, and she was at the time the main sort of like social media manager for their TikTok account, which they launched during the pandemic. And their idea was to use TikTok to spread health-related information, to use it for educational content, communicate with younger audiences. Great support from the leadership, which is unusual, especially now when it comes to TikTok. It was a strategic decision that they took, and it was not just an experiment. And the biggest challenge was at the time for them to produce the content for TikTok. The next one.
Hey, Andreas.
Elia, French President Emmanuel Macron is the latest of a handful of world leaders to join TikTok. How do you grade his debut?
So Macron gets a 6 for execution because it's essentially a vertical video that doesn't take advantage of any of TikTok's editing skills. But he gets a 10 for reaching out and meeting students where they are.
Do you see growing opportunities on TikTok for creators in the space of digital diplomacy and social impact?
I think there's a lot of opportunity for social impact. You've got so much misinformation, so many conspiracy theories. You need official sources like the WHO that joined in March, or Addison Rae or Charlie D'Amelio, the influencers who have helped with campaigns to educate people.
What's your advice to your students about TikTok?
So I've been telling my students to get on for a couple of years now. Instagram and YouTube are really saturated, but then you've got this new contender, TikTok, hyper explosive growth, a super engaged audience, an algorithm that rewards creators, and it's a lot of fun.
Bye, Leah. Thank you. And again, here, Leah Haberman at UCLA in Los Angeles was explaining why TikTok was first grading Emmanuel Macron, what at that time was opening and launching his TikTok account, but also explaining why TikTok is so important. She mentioned meeting young people where they are. She mentioned using it as a tool to counter misinformation and conspiracy theories, official sources versus also using influencers and creators on campaigns. And she said Instagram and YouTube are and were at that point more saturated. And can diplomacy be fun? That's the question that I'm going to leave you with at the end of this presentation, because it can be fun for me, but not everybody has the same experience. The next one.
Hi, Andreas.
Hi, Vanessa. So from the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 to launching on TikTok so very recently, who's your audience here on social media?
Our audience on social media varies. We go from academics and diplomats to young people, young activists around the world who want change and who are changing things. And the thing we all have in common is that we want to see a world without the threat of nuclear weapons.
And what is your advice to other NGOs, charities, and nonprofits to leverage TikTok?
Have fun with TikTok. I think that is the beauty of this platform. It allows you to create educative content, but in a very fun and joyful way.
TikTok in one word.
Revolutionary.
Instagram.
Collaboration.
Facebook.
Community.
Twitter.
Informative.
YouTube.
YouTube would be entertainment for me.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Andreas.
And again, here, Vanessa, she's the social media manager at ICANN, the international campaign against nuclear weapons. And she talks about the audience. The audience on their TikTok is not just young people, but it's also academics and diplomats. So that means that those people are on the platform, and young activists especially. Education is something that is coming up on almost every interview, using the platform for educational purposes, and how education can be fun and joyful. Again, another question that, how can that relate to diplomacy in general?
They said, what makes TikTok so addictive and unique?
Hi, Andreas. I think it's the way the TikTok algorithm works. It tailors content specifically for each user. So you can sit on your phone hours on end and scroll through content that you will end up enjoying.
And what are your top 3 tips for creators like you?
3 tips for new, I would say be consistent, be yourself, and then follow trends.
What do you think is TikTok's best feature?
That's a tough one because there are so many different features that make TikTok unique. But I think sounds are one of the main ones. There's so many different sounds, both original and like music tracks that you can play around with, and you can just in one video, you can do so much with one sound.
Thank you. Bye.
And so here I use Sam Schmier. Sam Schmier now works at the White House, but back then he was just a creator on TikTok. It was very popular. From being a creator, it started to work with Amnesty International and other organizations. It then joined what was called at the time Gen Z for Biden, and Gen Z for Biden became Gen Z for Change. So it was the director of communication for Gen Z for Change, which I invite everybody to explore both on Instagram and TikTok. They do extremely good work in terms of how they approach the platforms. And from Gen Z for Change, it was hired by the White House. He now works for the digital strategy team at the White House. So what he was actually saying is that, again, something that I mentioned before, the algorithm is very important. The be consistent and follow trends are, something that needs to be taken into consideration when it comes to TikTok, and the sound. So how music can sort of like be a tool for diplomacy as well. Here, the next one and last.
Hi, Andreas.
Hi, Anna. So almost 2 million followers on TikTok and 17 million likes. What's the key to your success?
Well, we tend to post shorter versions of our most popular videos, and we post them twice a day. So I would say the winning formula there is popular storylines and volume.
The biggest lessons learned since you launched over 2 years ago?
The reach on TikTok is astonishing. A hashtag campaign we did 2 years ago got over 4 billion views. But without careful curation and without obvious links back to your organization's website, all of that attention can fail to translate into followers.
Any new projects or campaigns coming up?
We're trying to branch out from our usual caption TikTok videos and include more faces and personalities. And also, ultimately, how do we make humanitarian work more attention-grabbing, more fun for social media? And it's something we're still working on.
Thank you, Anna. Bye. So this was Anna at the World Economic Forum. It was actually one of the first organizations that ever used TikTok. And they actually used it in a different way compared to others, because they sort of like repost content that is from other platforms, and they repost it in a different way, but on TikTok. And they use shorter versions of that popular content that they posted on other platforms. Again, the word consistency and volume become very important when it comes to TikTok, because the algorithm sort of appreciates if you post consistently, same time, same more than once a day, and the volume it really gets a lot of views. And that the reach, as everybody almost is saying, is astonishing, more than other platform. Careful curation, so there's a little more work on TikTok than other platforms. And how to make the content fun, it's one of the biggest challenges again. So 3 macro trends and takeaways have emerged from those interviews, and those are also the takeaways that I put, the macro trends that sort of like we talk about in the chapter of the Oxford Handbook. The first one being educational content. So using TikTok to educate young audiences about political issues or issues that are sort of related to foreign policy and social good. The second one is countering mis and disinformation on those political issues. And again, the idea when the first few organizations came out and launched on TikTok, it was because they needed to counter misinformation and disinformation on COVID. And then three, empowering young people to engage in political discussions. And though it's, to me, it's a mix of empowering those young people, but also nurturing those conversations, because those young people, the younger audiences, are very keen about being part of a conversation, and they really want to be part of conversations that are changing the world. So those are the main three macro trends and takeaways. Now, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the third one, how to empower young people to engage in political discussion, and what does it really mean to engage in a political discussion, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And so to me, there are two factors. One is polarization. So TikTok almost, I would say a little bit more than other platforms, is very polarized. And so there's a lot of content that is on the one extreme side and a lot of content that is on the other extreme side. But there's a lot of content in the middle that really is sort of like generating better conversations and real conversations compared to any polarized content. So polarization is important because it is actually sort of like nurturing conversations. On one side, polarization is sort of like giving the algorithm a push so that content is pushed out with more views, but then more views also translate in more conversations and oftentimes in better conversations. The second one is the question, is content still king? And so I have my own personal answer to that. Content is not king any longer, but conversations are. And so we need to focus less on content and less on spending weeks and weeks or sometimes months to create campaigns that go nowhere, and sort of focusing more onto how can we really reach a level of conversation on our social media platforms. Doesn't matter if it's TikTok or not, but how can we really like spur those conversations, nurture those conversations, and at the end, how can we really be part of those conversations? Because you don't want to just insert yourself in conversation. You don't just want to be the one spark about the conversation, but you do want to be part of those conversation and sort of like see what each side is telling you.
Let's be very precise. Yesterday it was a failure.
You have to choose sides. There are no gray zones anymore.
Io non sono pessimista. This is why I think Prime Minister Orban has a strong incentive to converge and find with us a good consensus.
This is a decisive time.
So this is a video that I posted on We Are Digital Diplomacy last week. It's a video about what happened at the European Council in Brussels when Ukraine was admitted for accession talks at the European Union. And it's just a video that really doesn't tell you much. It's just like a bunch of like lines by world leaders and comments by world leaders, but it's one of the videos of the latest video that I published that really generated a lot of conversations. A lot of it was polarized, so a lot of it was like not interesting, but a lot of those conversations and a lot of those comments were really interesting, and it generated hundreds of comments. So here you see, I mean, you can see a few of those comments that the video generated. Sorry, but why always pro-Ukraine? Why never pro-European Union? Why you never think about your citizens first? And then that question, somebody answered that question. Wise words I heard in a while. We are not all blind. Pro-democracy, that's EU. Ukraine is fighting to be free of Russians rule, and Russia won't let them. Another comment with a bunch of other sort of like answers to it. Well done, Orban, for holding the EU accountable. You are correct. if you set up rules, it means everyone in the group or who wants to join the group has to follow those rules, no exceptions, and on and on and on. So I do think that there's a opportunity there, especially when it comes to TikTok, because content really generates discussions, really generates conversations. And I think the challenge there is how can we be part of those conversations without sort of like holding those conversations on our end. So the book also talks about great best practices. And one of the best practices that I've seen around is has been started by the White House here. And the White House obviously, and I'm going to talk very little about the geopolitical issues around TikTok, but the White House is not on TikTok. The Biden campaign is not on TikTok. No governments, organizations, or agencies are on TikTok in the United States because there's a ban, and no government employees have TikTok. Has TikTok on their government phones. But the White House is using TikTok in a way that is asking TikTokers to come to the White House and sort of like brief them, just like they briefed the journalist on issues that are important to the White House agenda, whether it's like Ukraine, Israel, or chips, or any domestic issues. And here are two videos that one on Ukraine and the other one on domestic with TikTokers, using TikTokers. So it's not a White House video, but it's after the White House briefed TikTokers.
So I just got off of a Zoom call with the White House about the situation in Ukraine. A number of other content creators in social media and myself were invited to this event, which was on background, meaning that we couldn't record or take pictures, but we can discuss what we learned from it. Now, there was definitely a lot discussed, but in this video, I'm going to go over the specific question that I got to ask, the answer to it, and my thoughts on their response. And as a quick piece of context, a lot of the people there ask questions based off of the content they create and what they feel their audience might want to know. So that informs the question that I personally asked. So this was my question. Many people from marginalized communities in the United States have become dejected regarding the situation because there's an imbalance of coverage and assistance given to the Ukraine-Russia crisis compared to other occupations, invasions, and attacks throughout the world, some of which have U.S. involvement. What incentivizes these Americans to be in strong support of the U.S., giving high levels of attention and direct aid against the Russian invasion, as we feel there isn't enough attention on related issues in other places throughout the world and right here in the United States? First, I'll try to give a direct summary of what they said, which can be divided into 4 different points. All
right, I'm not going to give you the entire video because it's a little bit long. TikTok allows 3-minute videos. But my takeaway is that the White House is not on TikTok, but they were able really to engage audiences on TikTok without being on the platform, and just like informing the people that they invited to the White House, whether it's via Zoom or in person at the time, on their policy and their vision for Ukraine. And so I invite you, even if you are on TikTok and you want to search on TikTok White House Ukraine, and you'll see a lot of those large influencers, some of them like with millions and millions of followers on the platform. And this is another video on a more domestic issue.
Y'all, this week I was invited to the White House to celebrate the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act. And then this happened. I got to meet the president and the vice president. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why all parents should care about this historic bill. 1, this bill has big investments that are basically like a pledge to our children's future, because it's putting billions of dollars towards climate solutions and environmental justice that will essentially put us on a path to 40% emissions reductions by 2030. This is going to help our kids in the long term avoid the effects of disastrous climate change. 2, it's going to lower energy costs for families by making it easier and cheaper for us.
So that gives you sort of an idea of how those TikTokers, like their takeaways, and how they're actually explaining to their audiences what the Inflation Reduction Act was and how it's actually impacting their own lives. So again, very good best practice that even like the First Lady at one of the Christmas parties in the past few weeks, like sort of like explain. And here just a very short video about what she said, Joe Biden.
everyone in this room, all of you have been a part of changing the way we get news and information. And so we wanted to honor that.
So this clip is from a Christmas party that Jill Biden hosted for influencers and creators, not just on TikTok, but on all platforms, and how the White House is really working with them in a completely different way, involving them in sort of like briefing them and sort of so that they really understand what goes on behind closed doors at the White House. Here are some of the comments. Often, again, going back to the idea of polarizing and something that the White House and other organizations that are using TikTok in this way. So not being on TikTok, but using TikTok, having a relations with influencers, how can the relation be explained to the public? Because as you see in those comments, you know, the other side think that those influencers and creators have been paid, or they're just like a voice for the White House, which they are, but again, not paid. Another best practice that if anybody of you decides to enter or launch on TikTok is from the Washington Post. So the Washington Post was one of the first news outlets to open on TikTok. They're very popular. They have more than a million followers. I'm not sure about the numbers now, but at one point, and this is Dave Jorgensen, who's the sort of TikTok lead for the Washington Post, explains that they were sitting in a meeting, and you'll see on top of the screen here, a meeting one day when one of the teammate, Carmilla Boykin, suggested to repost the videos they use on TikTok onto YouTube Shorts. So I followed actually that suggestion, and I started, again, because I'm working on We Are Digital Diplomacy as a research tool on TikTok, and I started to post those videos almost the same with no overworking the video, just like sometimes a little bit shorter. And I started to post them on YouTube Shorts. And actually, the engagement that you get there is quite fantastic as well. And so I think like whatever works on TikTok is now working quite well on YouTube Shorts as well. And so, and that gives you like options, especially because TikTok can be a platform that requires a lot of time for creating content, just to reuse that content on YouTube Shorts, where it works really well. I often repost that content on Instagram as well. It doesn't work as well. I think like the issue with Instagram is like they rework their algorithm too many times. And so another best practice that came out from TikTok. So the geopolitical issues, this is like and I'm just going to try to be very short on the geopolitical issues, because we probably everybody knows about issues there. Is it an issue? Is it not an issue? It is an issue. This was the cover of the New York Times Magazine this past year at the beginning of the year. The article talks about sort of like, let me actually try to move this. Oh, I lost my thing. I can't see. All right. So the article talks about contradictory position about TikTok. It talks about one of the extraordinary successes of TikTok is that it's a product of America's greatest geopolitical rival, China, although it's not really so, because again, the popularity of TikTok happened after they merged with an American platform called Musical.ly, and it sort of like the TikTok developed through that partnership. And then the main issue there is, and you'll see at the end, the main concerns are data privacy and Chinese government influence. I'm not going to talk about Chinese government influence, but the data privacy element, I think, is quite important, because it's sort of like the focus of the main conversations, both here in the United States and in Europe, although the approach is a little bit different. So I'm not going to talk about the approach here in the United States. I'm going to talk about the approach in Europe, because in Europe they were able to develop guidelines and a very strong position on TikTok and other platforms. And so I'll give you a little clip of you'll see is Vestager, who's the European Commissioner for the digital age, and you see what she says about TikTok and about data privacy.
I found it very impressive what President Biden wrote a couple of weeks ago in an op-ed where I think the main takeaway was the need to make sure that we keep big tech accountable. First on privacy. Back in 2016, in the European Union, we put the General Data Protection Directive into place. It is fully enforced. Right now, there are actually 2 investigations into TikTok and their use of data. As you will know, on Commission work phones, there's no room for TikTok either. But that is really not enough. It's important to have, of course, a broad, legally based approach to this, because as long as the same kind of data is for sale, and that China can buy it everywhere anyway, well, then we still have work to do.
So here I'm going to leave here with a question, because again, the conversations around the issues surrounding TikTok, but not just but also other platforms, is that one of the things that we always think about TikTok is the fact that the ownership is Chinese. But again, what she says at the very end is that even if we solve the issue of ownership, and so it becomes an American company or it becomes a European company, that doesn't really matter, because the data there is still available out there for purchase and anybody can get it, not just China, not just Russia, not other autocratic regimes, but really anybody. And so data privacy and protecting that data has to become sort of like one of the main focuses, not just the ownership of a company. So data, more than just platforms, it's sort of like should be the focus. So I'm going to leave the presentation there. So if anybody has questions, let me know.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andreas, for this presentation. I mean, I have a whole page of notes over yonder. But I wanted to take, before we open it up to the floor, just the moderator's prerogative to kind of ask the first question and to make the first comment. First comment being, we did get to see your yellow shoes, so I'm glad that they made an appearance in one of those videos. So thank you for adding that in there. I know I was looking for that. For those of you who don't know, Andreas has the best shoes, the best colored shoes. It's an art form, and he's mastered it. But on a more serious note, I want to ask you, particularly because Eddie works with government communicators, and you made a really strong point that I wish so many more of us would pay attention to, which is that content is no longer king, but conversation is. And that is a really difficult shift for governments who used to be in, let's say, the kind of pre-digital era, have significant amount of power and influence over what people were discussing, what was in the media, what kind of political discussions were being bandied about between the citizens. But they were never having to invite anyone into that conversation. I think that's really been one of the big kind of like threshold and precipice moments of the kind of pre-digital to digital diplomacy divides. How would you recommend that government communicators, including some here who work for the US government who I've seen who have joined us, how would you say, whether it's on TikTok or any other platform, pivot more towards a conversational structure than a content-based structure, particularly when content is the easiest thing to show, as you know, our leadership to demonstrate that we are doing work and that it may or may not be having an impact?
So I think there are 2 factors. One is the listening part. So conversations is not just about saying something, but it's also listening to what other people are saying. And platforms like TikTok, not just TikTok, but all of the platforms are really allowing us to listen to what's happening out there and where the trends are or what the main concerns are. And so the listening part is something that oftentimes we forget because we have communication priorities to put out. And so we forget about the listening part. And the other part is that the tools that we have available are are not just tools for sort of like sparking a conversations or inserting ourselves into a conversation, but is to look at the conversation and really sort of like understand if we can be part of those conversations, or if we can just like step back and work with the people that are forming those conversations, that are nurturing those conversations. So the idea of what the White House has been doing with TikTokers and other creators and influencers on other platform is that we're not on TikTok. The White House is not on TikTok. How can we sort of influence those conversations without even being part of those conversations? And so that's a different aspect. It's a different way of thinking about communications than just like putting out content and waiting for something to happen, or creating campaigns that oftentimes cost millions of dollars. And sometimes they really don't go anywhere, or they really don't go the way that we really want to. And so what TikTok has changed in a way is the working with creators and influencers in a different way, so that we don't give them lines, we offer them our view, and maybe that view is then like changes through the way that they post their content, through the way that they engage their audiences. But at least you were able at some point to be part of the conversation before the conversation forms. And the challenge here is now, how at one point are we going to be able to insert ourselves into those conversations without really guiding them, but just being part of the conversation? I hope that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And with that, I want to open it up to the audience. If they have any questions, you can just raise your hand. Otherwise, I have a good amount more that I'd like to throw at you, Andreas. So, but I want to give this open to anyone. All right. Don't see any hands. Lawrence, are you going to say anything? Do I get to play this card?
No, I found it very interesting, but I have no questions. I'm very sorry.
Okay, Lawrence, that sounds great. Well,
I actually, the question that I did at the very beginning, if anybody has like strong views on either TikTok or other platforms, or even if they've been using TikTok on a personal level, I'd love to hear their experience and see whether they're going to keep using it or whether they're going to say, no, I'm never going to use TikTok in my life.
Jessica and Lawrence, I won't rat you out if you say that you've used TikTok at some point. Secret safe with me.
We had another discussion about TikTok today with our friends in Georgia, Tbilisi, and they were also wondering about it. And we actually gave the same kind of example that you gave, to not directly use it, but have influencers who almost per definition are on TikTok, to invite them and to work through them to do that. I mean, you lose a lot. You don't get any of the metrics, you don't get any of the base, you don't get any fixed accounts. But I think at the moment for the US government, that's just not a possibility.
Yeah, what you lose is also control, because you don't have control for those conversations, which is it would be a big change for government.
But control on a Chinese platform, that's unlikely.
True.
Does anyone else have any deep experiences with TikTok they want to share? No? All right. Well, and Andreas, I have another one for you. So one of the biggest areas of research in digital diplomacy now is kind of this intersection with computer-mediated behavior. And an area that they're looking at are platform affordances. So basically, what are the tools that a platform provides us, and how do those tools change our behavior and our affiliations and our associations with platforms? So basically, if a social media platform allows us to do something, do we find ourselves doing that more? And then does that open the door to other types of expression? And what is the effect of that on political efficacy? Now, there's one thing about TikTok that you mentioned, is that the kind of explosive growth of content creators and individuals who feel that they can use that platform. Do you find that the ease of access of TikTok and the ease of production on TikTok facilitates greater participation in that, and therefore perhaps has a greater, let's say, association or affiliation with conversation. Because so many people can easily participate, there's a low threshold and low competency threshold for participation. And has that kind of moved this discussion more towards viewing content and kind of edutainment, as the one person said, on YouTube, to more of a participatory model on TikTok?
Yeah, yes and no, to be honest. So TikTok is a platform. Actually, let's go back to ByteDance. ByteDance is a company. The main purpose is making the easiest way possible for users of all their platforms to be on the platform so that they keep spending time on their platform. And so you get used to it. You get sort of like every day you keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And so that's the tools that they make available for creating content are less important than the algorithm that it's behind, because they created users that are not just willing to go to the platform, but they really need and want to go on the platform every single day. Once you're there, you're hooked. And you're hooked in a way that you want to create content on TikTok. And so all the tools that they provide, and they're not just embedded with TikTok, but also ByteDance owns an app called CapCut. And CapCut is one of the single best apps to produce content, not just for TikTok, but for other platforms as well. Because one, it's completely free. Fully free, so you don't have to pay a dime like other apps out there to produce videos and content, and they're fully embedded with not just TikTok but also other platforms like Instagram. So you can be on CapCut without realizing that you're using a Chinese app to create content for TikTok. So that makes very easy for content creators and influencers to create content. It's also a generational thing. Gen Z and younger generations feel more at ease to produce content, and the content is not overproduced. So whatever works really well on TikTok is because there's no overproduction there. But it makes it actually, on the opposite side, harder for government agencies and government communicators to produce content, because actually you need to first understand the content. You need to produce content that is different from the content that you produce from other platforms. And so that requires more money, more investments, more staff, and people that really understand the platform. Otherwise, the content doesn't go anywhere.
Perfect. All right, good. And then, not seeing any other hands, I have one more question for you before we wrap up. So it can't go without saying, and you noted this at the beginning, that the US can't be directly, we can't directly engage on TikTok. We have to do it through influencers. We have to do it through other means. When we have partners, they can use it, etc. But I cannot be on TikTok, which means that not only can I not really watch TikTok and really understand what's happening until it comes through the recycled old man version of Instagram Reels, and by that time, everything I'm seeing is already dead. Do you feel that governments who stay off TikTok, should this pivot continue, are going to be at a significant disadvantage when it comes to creating their messaging and holding those conversations, not only in terms of not being on the platform, but not understanding the digital literacy of, say, certain new modes of communications or modalities inherent in those conversations? And if so, how can we as individuals who perhaps can't get on there try to overcome that?
Well, I don't think it's gonna be a disadvantage. One, because again, you can still you can be on TikTok without being on TikTok. And so working with creators and influencers is key, and not just for TikTok. It's become very important for other platforms as well. Again, you don't control the narrative there, but that's another way of adjusting to how social media is now working. So that part, your government agency, without being on technically on TikTok, you can still be on TikTok. So that's not a disadvantage. Not only that, staffers generationally are changing. And so all the digital natives that are joining government agencies and government in general know what TikTok is all about. They might know less about Twitter, actually, because Twitter is like sort of dying. And so you might need to sort of like educate them on Twitter, but they are educating you on TikTok. And again, the idea that the example that I showed of the White House, one of the staffers at least used to work on TikTok all the time. He used to be a creator on TikTok, and so is bringing that sort of like knowledge to the White House digital strategy team. And the White House, without being on TikTok, is actually super powerful and super a super creator on TikTok without being a super creator on TikTok.
True. All right. Well, good. Well, that is an optimistic note to end on, making sure there's no digital divide there. But thank you, Andreas.
My advice is never like, I'm not telling anybody be on TikTok or don't be on TikTok. My only advice would be like, don't think of TikTok only because of the conversation around the geopolitical issue, the ownership, the Chinese ownership. Obviously, those are real issues, and data privacy, data securities, those are very important issues, and you have to take those into consideration. But be open to a platform that is taking over millions of billions of users around the world, not just here in the United States.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's a really, like I said, a strong note to end on. Is that there are these platforms that are growing. There's a need to be open to them because as digital communicators, we have to be open to figuring out how to engage with our audiences in order to make sure that our audiences feel efficacious, then make sure that they feel informed, make sure that they feel involved in something. So being open to these things and taking some creative approaches, as Andreas kind of outlined, is absolutely necessary part of our job and a critical component for making sure we're doing our job well. And Andreas, you did a lot to educate us here to make sure that we could do that. So I'm super appreciative of you, of your time. Again, I want to tell everyone where they can find you. So it's Andreas212NYC for his personal account, and We Are Digital Diplomacy for his more institutional account, which is still on a lot of Andreas. So if you want your daily double dose, I know I follow him on both both handles on most platforms that I'm on. Never got bored of it, so I recommend everyone else do the same. But Andreas, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining our community again. We can't wait to have you out with us in person the next time we can get together. Bring those yellow shoes or those tennis ball green shoes. Those are also really good ones. And we can't wait to gain your insights further. So thank you so much, Andreas. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for,
Thank you for having me.
Of course, anytime. And thank you for everyone who took the time to join us this morning. We're going to be having further conversations, additional conversations with different people who are experts in this field, different people from academia, different people from government, different people from civil society. So please continue to follow us on LinkedIn for announcements about those, and we'll make sure to get you all joined up for those in the future. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again sometime next month.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.